Good evening, everybody. Hell's Unicorn here again. This evening, I'm just going to be doing one nice, quick stream of consciousness regarding the state of things. And I'm not just talking about the presidential election here, although that is definitely a worthy topic because we just had what might be the final debate of the Republican primary. I'm talking about the state of things, period. An open-ended concept could mean anything, and indeed it means actually everything. When people turn on the television set, they get an earful. They get a ton of information, most of it untrue. But it is regularly believed. It is regularly accepted verbatim as the default position to be accepted regardless to what one's conscience may or may not say to the contrary. No matter what anyone's latent sense of intellectual curiosity might say to the contrary. For a long time I've thought, you know something, it's the content of the television set that is truly the greatest adversary of any attempt at enlightening the human race and bringing it out of the current stupor that it's stuck in. But in truth, it's more the concept of the television and not just the content itself. Not just that, but the concept as a whole. I actually saw a movie, several weeks ago. It's an old movie from the early 80s. It's a sci-fi horror flick called Videodrome. And it deals with a person that actually goes through metaphysical changes in his perception and physical changes in his body based on signals that are broadcast through the television. These signals are referred to as Videodrome. This person actually physically changes to the point where he has a gun for a hand. And he is able to implant explosives that are actually a part of his physical body. This is completely outlandish. Obviously, it was meant simply to shock people, but sometimes I actually wonder, when I see all of the lunacy and hysteria that continuously gets peddled through the news, all the networks, everybody has their own little particular brand of insanity. They have a different label they put on it. They have certain little parts of the general and whole of the insanity that they like to focus on more, and they like to direct it a certain way. But it's all the same big, massive lump of irrational nonsense. The culmination of all of this is a state of societal chaos. And it's a wonder to me that we as a nation have not completely economically collapsed and socially collapsed under the weight of all of this chaotic messaging. We have people saying that a tiny, insignificant little speck of a military contained within a moderate-sized country in Iran is somehow an existential threat to the whole of Western civilization. People believe it. People don't question it. My own father doesn't question this, and I debate him on the subject often. And when I begin to make a little bit of headway on the subject, it's right back to Fox News and right back to Rush Limbaugh for him. Like a person addicted to a drug needing to run back for his next fix as soon as withdrawal starts to kick in. I'm convinced that the content that is present in televised news is the equivalent of an addictive drug, but the dealer itself is not necessarily one particular network, not particularly even one particular message that's being sent through this chaotic wavelength. It's more the concept of simply sitting there and passively consuming information. There's no processing of the information to speak of. The information is already pre-processed for you. It's the equivalent of a bird digesting the food for its chicks and then regurgitating it into their mouths. We, as Americans, and I would argue maybe even we as an entire human race, are becoming dumber and dumber by the day because of this. Because of all of this thinking being done for us. When a certain muscle in the body doesn't get exercised, it goes into atrophy. And the whole of American culture has been subject to an intellectual form of atrophy. How do you explain a nation that was founded on the principle of non-involvement with the insanity that was going on in Western Europe at the time, these United States of America, morphing into the crazed imperialistic beast that it is today? The development of radio newscasting and television newscasting and the centralization of power in who actually is the one responsible for outlaying all the information, sending it all out. That's where you get the change. There is a dereliction of sorts in the people that are supposed to be responsible for keeping people informed that naturally preceded this, but the maintenance of this vegetated state that we're in is entirely the result of the television continually being in place, continually determining how people think. I've also been of the opinion that the primary adversary of the television generation, which is a generation that is easily molded into whatever any given person with power wants it to be, the enemy of this particular generation is the internet generation. And the internet generation is a generation that's more discerning. We have to be. It's an interactive medium. It's not a passive one-way direction of information the way the television is. The problem is that many people of the television generation still hold power, and some of them have even tried to transfer this mentality and this way of doing things onto the internet. And that's why we're not seeing the changeover that we want to see culturally, which is the dominance of a more discerning generation. The baby boomers and the first half of Generation X, as far as I'm concerned, are completely useless. And I'm speaking as someone who came in at the tail end of Generation X. I'm not Generation Y, and I'm not a millennial. That much should be obvious to anybody who can see my age clearly displayed on my profile. One could argue that I'm somewhat the exception rather than the rule. I'm past military service age. So the foreign policy thing is something that I should have been more heavily involved in when I was in my early 20s, when I could have potentially been subject to the draft, but it wasn't. It wasn't until the past 5 to 6 years that this became important to me. And it became important to me because I started doing something that I hadn't been doing nearly enough of before. My own research, reading, actively engaging my mind, becoming something other than what you see walking down the street every day in a daze whenever you go out. The point that I think I'm ultimately trying to get here with this stream of consciousness is this. It's not enough to be on the right track, which is where I argue we are right now. The process needs to be hastened. I think that we, as the purveyors of a return to a nation based in liberty, have to become more aggressive. We have to become more assertive. And we have to get into a lot of people's faces in the process. Short term, it might look like we're turning people off. But I submit to you the following. While no one will be converted in a face-to-face debate because the ego of the human mind will not allow itself to be wrong in public, there's no way that progress is made unless information is put out there. And we have to be bold in doing it, and we have to be methodical in doing it. That's where we differ with the lunatics out there that think that the chaotic state of things is normal and should thus remain the normal state of affairs. We have the ability to be methodical. We have the ability to actually plot a course through this infinite regression of insanity and irrationality and make some sense of it. In closing, I will just say, with regards to all of the crap that I see on the news, this stuff about the reporter that was killed in Syria, the nonsense about how Libya is in such great shape since we went in there and did our thing, when the exact opposite is the case. I'm at the point right now where if CNN or MSNBC or one of these other networks tells me it's 10 o'clock in the morning, I have to check my watch. I can't take anything they say as fact. I can't take anything that the Associated Press or Reuters puts out as being gospel until I have checked it and rechecked it against competing news sources. I will contrast it with what I see on Russia Today. I will contrast it with what I see on Al Jazeera. I will contrast it with what I see in the blogosphere. I am going to read every single source I can get my hands on. And that's what separates me and all of you listening to me right now and anybody else of a similar persuasion from the people that are screwing up the world right now. And when it falls to us to pick up the pieces, we shouldn't be shy about it. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.